The sun had barely lifted its golden head when the dusty road to Kamwali began to stir. Fine red soil rose under the feet of travelers like a waking spirit, dancing in the warm air. Women balanced baskets on their heads, the beads around their necks clicking in rhythm with their steps. Old men sat beneath the acacia trees, tapping their walking sticks as they shared stories of yesterday's foolish youth and tomorrow's uncertain change. Even the stray goats wandering too close to the vendors seemed to sense that this road carried more than dust. It carried the heartbeat of the village. Near the bend, where the old path met a newly paved strip of highway, a small gas station stood like a stranger unsure of its welcome. Half of it was wrapped in rusted metal and peeling paint, holding the memories of older days. The other half held bright signs, humming lights, and the smell of machine oil, telling of a world that was pushing its way in. To many, it felt like standing with one foot in the past and the other stepping into something that didn't know how to respect the old ways. This was where Kamwali's spirit wrestled with itself, between the ancestors' whispers and the city's roar. As the morning thickened, the market beside the road burst into life. Voices rose and fell like waves in the ocean. A tomato seller shouted prices. A fisherman argued proudly that his catch was fresher than the ones brought from the city. Children chased each other between stalls, laughing as vendors pretended to scold them. And beneath all the noise, beneath all the color and trading, there was a thin thread of tension, the kind that only the wise could hear. Change was coming to Kamwali, and the people felt it, even if they didn't speak of it aloud. Yet, despite all the busyness, the land held a quiet pride. The tall trees stood like patient warriors, guarding stories older than the village itself. Sometimes the wind swept through their leaves in a way that made people stop talking and listen. They believed it was the ancestors passing by, reminding them, "Do not forget us. Do not forget who you are." But even as the spirits watched, the city's shadow crept closer. New buildings, new faces, new temptations. The soul of Kamwali was being chased, though it refused to run. Down the road, wiping grease from his hands, stood Cato. To many, he was simply the young mechanic who could fix anything with a motor. But to those who knew him well, he was much more. A son molded from the soil of Kamwali, shaped by the gentle strength of his late mother. She used to whisper to him, "Cato, a man's heart must be steady like the earth. Storms may come, but the soil does not flee." Those words stayed with him like footprints that never washed away. His hands were rough, marked by years of repairing old engines and lifting heavy parts. But those same hands held a softness when it came to family and neighbors. When someone fell, he reached out first. When someone needed help carrying a load, he was already there. Even strangers passing by the gas station felt comfortable stopping to ask for directions or a bit of water. His quiet nature had a warmth that made people trust him without question. Sometimes, while resting beside the workshop, he would remember his mother sitting by the fire, her voice low and wise. She had taught him that a man's duty was not only to his home but to the land that raised him. "Cato," she would say, "never forget that a home is not walls and roof. It is the people who breathe life into you." He carried those teachings like a shield, especially on days when life tried to bend him. Above all, he held tightly to a belief that she had drilled into him since childhood: a man does not abandon his home. To Cato, those words carried both strength and weight. They kept him grounded when others left for the city seeking bigger dreams. They kept him responsible when life became harder than he expected. But they also chained him to a land that demanded more from him than most men could carry. In the middle of all this noise, dust, change, and tradition, Cato stood steady, unaware that life was preparing to test that belief in ways he never imagined. The city lights had always called sod like a drumbeat carried by the wind. Even when she sat in Kamwali, grinding maize or sweeping the compound, her eyes wandered toward the highway as if the road itself whispered her name. She loved the brightness, the tall buildings, the music, the fashion, and the feeling that life was faster there, more exciting. Sometimes she would sigh and say, "One day, I will not smell dust every morning. I will live where the streets shine like polished mirrors." People laughed, thinking she was only dreaming. But the longing in her heart was real, sharp, and restless. Deep inside, she lived in two worlds. One part of her loved her child, her home, and the quiet strength of Cato. But the other part, the louder part, wanted fame, attention, and the life she saw in magazines and on TV. She would rock her baby to sleep, yet her mind would drift to the city nightlife she missed. When Cato spoke of family, unity, and the ancestors' blessings, she listened with half a heart. Her voice would soften around her daughter, but her eyes sparkled when she talked about parties, modeling, or brands she couldn't afford. It was as if her dreams were pulling her in one direction, while motherhood anchored her in another. Her circle of friends in the city did not help. Whenever she visited, they whispered things that fed the fire in her spirit. "Sod, you're too beautiful for village life. You could be on posters, not sitting in a mechanic's yard. Why waste your youth raising a child in dust?" Their voices dripped with envy and empty praise, shaping her thoughts like water carving a stone. The more they talked, the more she believed them. And each time she returned to Camwelly, her smile grew thinner, and her laughter felt forced. Inside her, a storm began to grow. It started as quiet doubts, then turned into frustration, then a heavy, choking irritation she hid behind makeup and practiced smiles. At night, she stared at the ceiling, hearing the wind rustle through the trees like the ancestors were warning her. But she chose to ignore it. She convinced herself that life owed her something bigger, something brighter. And she started planning decisions she knew Cato would never agree with. One afternoon, under the calm heat of the sun, she approached Cato at the gas station. She held the baby wrapped in a soft pink blanket, her voice sugar-sweet. "Cato, I just need to buy something quickly from the market. I'll be back soon." He nodded, trusting her without question. She kissed the child's forehead gently, but her eyes were distant, already far away. Minutes passed. Cato tightened bolts on an engine and waited. Vendors shouted. The road hummed. Still no sod. He told himself she was delayed. Perhaps the queue was long. Perhaps she met someone she knew. But as the shadows grew longer and the sun shifted, a cold feeling crept into his chest. When an hour passed, silence struck him harder than any blow. He looked around with rising fear. "Sod," he called softly at first, then louder. The market women shook their heads. No one had seen her return. His heart thudded like a drumbeat warning of danger. Sweat gathered on his forehead even though the breeze had turned cool. Then he saw the child, alone, sleeping peacefully in the pink blanket, unaware of the world collapsing around her. The sight froze him. The blanket looked too soft, too innocent for the harshness of the moment. The tiny fingers curled gently, as if trusting that her mother had only stepped away for a breath. But Sod was gone. Truly gone. The baby's soft coo rose in the air like a question with no answer. Cato sank to his knees beside his daughter, the weight of betrayal crushing his chest. "No. Sod wouldn't," he whispered, but even as he said it, his voice broke. Tears he had not cried since his mother's death began to rise. The truth settled over him like a dark cloud, heavy, cold, merciless. His world, once steady and simple, shattered like clay thrown against stone. The ancestors watched. The wind fell silent. Even the vendors' voices seemed distant as Cato held his daughter close, realizing that the woman he trusted had abandoned them. And though he did not know it yet, this moment, this painful breaking, would shape everything that came after. The wind carried whispers through the dusty streets of Camwelly like seeds scattering in a dry field. By midday, the news had traveled faster than any vehicle. Sod had abandoned her child. Mothers shook their heads behind stalls, fingers pressing to lips as if the words themselves might offend the ancestors. Children paused mid-chase to stare at Cato, who stood silently beside the gas station, holding the pink blanket that cradled Nala. Some voices were soft, full of pity. "He will need strength to bear this alone." Others hissed with mockery, "A man cannot hold a woman's heart. She will return when she tires of him." Cato felt their eyes as if they were stones pressing into his back. He did not move, nor did he respond. The sun fell harshly across his shoulders, highlighting every crease in his face, every line carved by worry and sleepless nights. He felt exposed, not only to the dust and heat, but to the judgment of the community he had once believed would stand beside him. He thought of the old words his mother had spoken, "Abandon a child, and the ancestors will speak through the wind. The earth itself will mark the guilty." That warning now wrapped around him, not for him, but for the one who had left. Even as shame sank into his chest, Cato rose before the wind could claim his spirit. He returned to the workshop, wiping sweat and grease from his forehead. The engines he repaired would not judge him. They required only skill, patience, and strength. But the hours stretched endlessly. He worked under the blistering sun, lifting metal, tightening bolts, repairing engines that groaned like old animals in need of care. Every motion became a prayer for Nala's survival. Every drop of sweat was a promise. She would not know hunger, she would not know fear, she would not feel the absence of a father's love. The villagers whispered again as he carried water to the child, fed her, and dressed her in clean clothes. Their gaze was heavy with judgment, yet no one stepped to help. They were shocked that he did it alone, that he managed with dignity what they assumed would break him. Cato knew their surprise hid their ignorance. Raising a child in Camwelly was never the work of one man. It was a test of endurance, of heart, of a man's willingness to follow the path of responsibility, no matter how thorny. And he was determined to walk it. Night fell, and with it came quiet moments where the pink blanket was laid gently over Nala as she slept. Its soft folds smelled faintly of sod, a scent that was both comforting and unbearable. The blanket became her anchor, a piece of a mother she could not yet understand. And Cato touched it, often clutching Sada's single earring he had found on that fateful day. It was small, unremarkable to anyone else, but to him it was a talisman of betrayal, love, and unfulfilled promises. He would hold it silently, sometimes pressing it to his lips, whispering to the ancestors, "Guide me! Let her grow in peace, even if her mother cannot stay." Days turned to weeks, weeks into months. Cato gave up his dreams of expansion, of learning new skills in far cities, of tasting freedom beyond the dusty roads of Camwelly. All of his aspirations were shelved to fuel the small life before him. And through it all, he remained humble, his heart patient, his hands calloused but gentle with Nala. He spoke little of Sod, choosing instead to nurture the child who had no choice in her fate, teaching her the ways of their people, the stories of their ancestors, the rhythm of life in Camwelly. The community continued to whisper, to judge, to pity, and to admire all at once. And though Cato never acknowledged it aloud, the whispers became his measure of perseverance. He had become a symbol, a single father standing unbroken under the sun, a man whose love was stronger than abandonment, whose heart refused to harden even as the world watched. Rumors rose over Camwelly like smoke from 1,000 cooking fires, curling into every corner of the village and slipping beneath doors. Every whisper carried its own flavor of cruelty. Some said Sod had left because Cato could not give her what the city promised, a life full of glimmering nights and endless luxury. Others twisted the story further, claiming she had always been restless, trapped by the dust and silence of the village. Even children repeated snatches of words they did not understand, their innocence failing to hide the sting of truth wrapped in lies. At the market, women whispered behind hands cupped like shells. He couldn't satisfy her city dreams, one said, shaking her head, eyes gleaming with a mixture of judgment and fascination. Men, leaning on walking sticks, muttered about failed responsibilities. A man must control his woman, they said with certainty, their voices heavy with authority. If she leaves, it is his fault. The words cut deeper than knives, embedding themselves in Cato's chest, but he did not respond. Some nights, when the sun had dipped and the village fell into a quiet murmur, Cato would sit by the fire outside his workshop, holding Nala close. His hands, calloused from work, stroked her hair softly. "They speak, little one," he whispered, "but we know the truth. You and I, we are the only ones who matter." The whispers of the village could not touch his resolve. In the silence, he became a symbol, a single father standing firm against a tide of gossip, against the weight of judgment, against the cruelty of a society quick to condemn. Yet the loneliness that followed him was real. It crept into the corners of his nights like a cold shadow. He lay awake, listening to the chirping of crickets, wondering if Nala would ever ask the questions that would pierce his heart. He feared the day she would notice the absence of her mother, the hollow spaces in stories he could not yet tell. He prayed to the ancestors, whispering, "Give me strength, let my daughter grow in love, not in bitterness." Each night was a trial, each morning a renewal of his vow to protect her, regardless of the whispers outside. 5 years passed like the turning of seasons. The sun rose and set over Camwelly, each day sculpting Nala into a sharp and intuitive little girl. She ran along the dusty streets with confidence, her laughter ringing like the clear sound of river water over stones. Her eyes observed everything, the way neighbors bowed to elders, the way goats avoided certain paths, the subtle expressions of people who spoke but meant other things. Time had gifted her curiosity, but also a wisdom that made Cato cautious. She asked questions freely, bold as the wind that whipped across the open plains. "Baba, why does that man always look at me when I pass?" she asked one afternoon, pointing to a distant trader. "Why do people whisper when they see us?" Cato smiled gently, brushing a lock of hair from her face. "The world sometimes speaks with many voices," he said softly, "but we listen with our hearts." He always guided her with warmth, never bitterness, keeping the truth wrapped in gentle stories and lessons rooted in their culture. Sometimes, the hardest question came quietly, without warning. "Baba, where is Mama?" Nala's voice trembled slightly, and Cato's heart ached like a drum struck too hard. He knelt to her level, his hands on her small shoulders. "Your mother, she is far away, child," he said, voice steady but gentle. "But she lives in the stories we tell, in the songs of the wind, in the love that surrounds us." He offered her hope, weaving half-truths with tradition, because the world was not yet ready for the pain of the full truth. And so, in Camwali, life continued. The whispers of the village lingered, but they could not touch the bond between father and daughter. Cato guided her with patience, teaching her the lessons of their people, the songs of their ancestors, and the strength to face a world that sometimes judged too quickly. Each day was a careful balance, protecting her innocence while preparing her spirit for the storms to come. And through it all, the pink blanket and the lonely earring remained, silent witnesses to a past that could not be erased, guiding both father and child toward resilience, love, and an unspoken promise of justice. The city lights stretched like rivers of fire, glittering and endless, calling to Saad as she walked the streets in high heels that clicked rhythmically on polished stone. Shop windows reflected her carefully arranged hair, her dress, the designer bag clutched tightly under her arm. Every step was measured, confident, a performance learned over 5 long years. Yet beneath the glitter, her heart felt hollow. The neon reflected an image she had built, but it did not warm the chill inside her chest. She smiled at colleagues, laughed at invitations, nodded at socialites. "I love this life," she whispered to herself in a mirror, though her voice sounded thin, almost strange. Inside, she carried a quiet weight, memories of Camwali, of dusty roads, of a child's laughter she no longer heard. Every glass she clinked, every party she attended, seemed to remind her that she had traded warmth for light, love for appearances. Saad buried the truth deep. "I have no child," she told anyone who asked too closely. She tucked her past into the folds of her dresses and the lines of her carefully rehearsed smiles. Every lie was a brick in the wall she built between herself and the guilt that followed like a shadow. Friends believed her story, but even as they praised her success, Saad felt it hollow, echoing in her chest like a drum without a rhythm. Consequences began knocking at her door. Relationships faltered quickly, men sensed the absence she could not admit. Friendships fractured under small lies she could not keep straight. Even her apartment, all glass and polished wood, began to feel like a cage. She realized that no amount of gold, no number of admirers, could heal the emptiness gnawing at her soul. The glitter of her life only highlighted the darkness she had left behind in Camwali. At night, the city's hum gave way to whispers of memory. Saad dreamt of a crying baby in the dust, small hands wrapped in pink cloth, reaching for her. She would wake with a gasp, heart pounding, her body drenched in sweat. The visions were vivid, the dusty road, the gas station, the soft, innocent coos. She could feel the ancestors' presence in these dreams, silent but unyielding, reminding her that the past cannot be escaped. Her unease grew. She noticed the small signs, a voice on the radio mentioning Camwali, a flyer for a cultural festival, a colleague speaking of family traditions. Each was a warning that judgment was coming, that destiny did not forget. She walked faster, tried to bury herself in work, but her pulse quickened at the thought of a reckoning she could no longer outrun. Then came the announcement. Camwali would host its grand cultural festival, a celebration of music, dance, and traditions. Drums would beat across the plains, calling people from city and village alike. Saad watched the posters and felt her chest tighten. The festival was a heartbeat of her past, a pulse she had thought she could escape. People would come from far and wide, and some memories would return with them. Crowds began traveling toward Camwali, bringing life back to the dusty streets and pathways she once knew. Vendors packed their wares, elders prepared blessings, and children rehearsed dances passed down through generations. The city and village would meet in one place, and Sod felt the stirrings of panic. What she had left behind was gathering, alive and vibrant, ready to remind her of everything she had tried to bury. Then came the final blow. Her company assigned her to represent them at the festival. She would return to Camwelly after 5 years, not as a visitor, but as someone sent officially into the very heart of the life she had abandoned. Her hands trembled as she accepted the briefing. "You will leave this week," her manager said, oblivious to the storm brewing inside her. The weight of her past pressed down on her chest like a stone. She stared out the city window at the glowing skyline and whispered, "I cannot go back. I cannot face it." Her reflection in the glass was beautiful, glamorous, polished. But the eyes staring back were afraid, knowing the road ahead would not be measured in distance, but in reckoning. Even in the midst of success, the city could not shield her from Camwelly's pull. The dusty roads, the whispers, the pink blanket, the child she left behind, they waited, like the patient eyes of ancestors, watching and ready to call her to account. Cato tightened his grip on the wrench as he adjusted the wires of a festival generator. The festival committee had sought him out because of his skill, a man who could fix what others could not. The villagers watched with admiration as he worked, sweat running down his forehead under the midday sun, muscles taut from years of toil. "Thank you, Cato," called the festival organizer. "Without you, the dances would falter, and the drums would not speak." Cato nodded quietly, never boasting, but proud that his hands could serve the heart of Camwelly. Beside him, Nala spun in delight, her eyes wide and sparkling as the first dancers twirled into the open square. The colors of their robes seemed to leap from the ground, and the drums beat in patterns that made her tiny feet bounce. "Baba! Look at them!" she cried, pointing to the dancers, ribbons flying like captured sunlight. Cato smiled, the joy of seeing her embrace their heritage soothing the long ache in his heart. The drums began their steady rhythm, deep and resonant, vibrating through the earth. To the villagers, they were more than music. They were voices of the ancestors, calling truths from hidden corners and summoning destiny to the open square. Cato felt the pulse in his chest, a reminder that time had a way of gathering all stories, weaving threads that none could escape. Somewhere beyond the tents and stalls, fate was moving as surely as the drumbeats, nudging lives toward a collision that had been written long ago. Nala's laughter rang out, unaware of the deeper currents, but Cato sensed the threads pulling tighter. He adjusted a tent pole, feeling the weight of the festival and the invisible hands of destiny guiding him closer to what must come. At the same time, Sada's journey toward Camwelly had begun. She sat in her shiny SUV, the city's glamour clinging to her like perfume, yet her stomach churned with dread. Somewhere in the dusty village, the same drums would speak to her, summon her to the truth she had long evaded. Hours later, the festival square buzzed with life. Sod stepped out of her vehicle, every inch the city woman she had become, yet every step heavier than the last. The sun caught her earrings and necklace, sparkling as if to mock her emptiness. She paused at the edge of the square, the noise of laughter, chatter, and music washing over her, but her eyes locked onto a figure standing tall under the rhythm of the drums. Cato looked up from his repairs just in time to see a face from the past. 5 years had hardened him but had not dulled the warmth in his eyes. Sada's breath caught, frozen as she took in the man who had become stronger, more resilient, and dignified beyond her imagining. The years of abandonment, the whispers of the village, and her own empty pursuits suddenly pressed down upon her chest. Between them stood Nala, holding the faded pink blanket that had been her comfort for 5 long years. The sight pierced Sada's heart like the tip of a spear. The small hands clutching the cloth, the bright eyes filled with innocence and trust, were living proof of a past she could no longer deny. She reached out slightly, and her lips trembled, but no sound came. Her heart pounded. The city streets, the glitter, the applause of admirers, none of it mattered now. All that existed was the child she had left behind and the man who had raised her with unwavering love. The weight of the truth pressed down, heavy as the sun over the Camwelly square. Tears pooled in her eyes, unbidden, as the ancestors' drums beat steadily, calling all secrets into the open, heralding the reckoning that destiny had long promised. Sada's hands shook at her sides. The past had caught her, alive and unyielding, and in the presence of her child and the man who had become her quiet judge, she felt the full weight of what she had abandoned. Every lie, every glittering distraction, every lonely night in the city had led her here, to a moment where heart, history, and destiny stood entwined before her. Sada's lips curved into a fragile smile, but it trembled, betraying the storm inside her heart. Her eyes darted to Kato and the small figure clinging to the pink blanket. Every memory she had tried to bury pressed against her chest, sharp as the midday sun over Kamwali. She wanted to speak, to call Nala's name, but the words lodged in her throat. Her hands fidgeted with the edge of her scarf, the city's glamour feeling hollow against the weight of 5 lost years. The villagers, sensing the tension, closed in, forming a quiet circle around her. Whispers drifted like smoke over the square. "It is she, the one who left the child at the station. How long has she hidden from fate?" The elders watched in solemn silence, their eyes carrying the collective memory of Kamwali, the community that never forgets, the people who remember deeds both good and grievous. With trembling legs, Saad took a step forward. Her eyes softened as they fell upon Nala, bright-eyed and trusting, unaware of the woman's absence for so many years. "Nala, my child," she murmured, voice low, almost swallowed by the festival's vibrant chaos. Each step toward the girl was a battle against shame, a test of courage against the guilt that had haunted her in sleepless city nights. Then, a shadow shifted behind Kato. Saad froze mid-step. The air thickened, the drumbeats from the festival seeming to echo in slow, heavy pulses. The woman who thought she had prepared for this moment realized the ground beneath her morality had shifted. Whatever courage she had gathered faltered as the figure stepped fully into view, radiating authority and calm judgment. Elder Weeksa emerged, robes flowing in the wind, face lined with years of wisdom, eyes steady and deep as the riverbeds of their ancestors. His presence was more than a man. It was the voice of the community, the echo of tradition, the living memory of justice. Sada's heart pounded as she recognized him, the elder who had guided Kato, who had raised Nala's spirit when she could not, who had silently ensured that life in Kamwali honored responsibility and truth. Weeksa's gaze met hers, calm but unwavering, as though the ancestors themselves were watching through his eyes. Every choice she had made, every lie she had told herself, every glittering street she had walked in the city, it all reflected back at her in the elder's steady expression. She was not facing a man alone. She was facing a people, a history, and the weight of her own actions. The villagers held their breath. Nala clutched the blanket closer, sensing the shift in the air, while Kato remained silent, standing like a rooted tree that had weathered storms. Sada's throat tightened. Here, before her, was the truth she could not escape. The elder's eyes were a mirror, showing not only her past failures but also the path she had yet to walk, toward redemption, honesty, and acknowledgement of the lives she had touched and left behind. The drumbeats of the festival seemed to slow, each vibration resonating through the earth, through her chest, through the invisible threads connecting all who stood in that square. Through Elder Weeksa, the ancestors watched, their judgment quiet but piercing, reminding her that actions in life ripple far beyond the immediate, touching hearts, shaping futures, and calling for justice in ways the living must heed. Sada's knees wobbled, yet she stood. Words failed her, but her eyes, wet and wide, spoke of regret, longing, and the realization that she had returned not just to Kato and Nala, but to the living spirit of Kamwali itself, a community that never forgets, a tradition that never sleeps, and a justice that waits patiently, like a river cutting through stone, for truth to meet it at last. The square fell into a silence so deep that even the wind seemed to pause. The drumbeats of the festival faded, leaving only the soft rustle of dust and the faint creak of wooden stalls. The truth hung in the air, heavier than the harmattan haze, pressing down on every soul present. Saad stood frozen, eyes wide, heart hammering. Not a single voice broke the quiet. It was as if the ancestors themselves had descended to witness this moment. Her knees buckled. She sank slowly to the red earth ground, hands clutching the hem of her elegant dress, now out of place in the humble square. I have failed," she whispered, voice cracking, carrying the weight of years spent in guilt. Tears ran freely, streaking the city dust from her cheeks. The crowd watched, some eyes soft with pity, others sharp with judgment. But none dared to speak. From the pink blanket, Nala stepped forward, tiny feet sinking into the dust. Her small hands fidgeted at her chest, and her eyes, wide and curious, fixed on the woman trembling before her. "Mama," she asked softly, unsure if this stranger belonged to her. The word hung between them like a fragile bridge, trembling under the weight of truth and hope. Saad extended a hand, trembling, toward the little girl. Each movement was deliberate, a gesture of longing, fear, and apology intertwined. Her fingers wavered inches from Nala's, quivering with the weight of a bond broken and now sought again. "Nala, it is me. I am here," she breathed, voice trembling with the quiet roar of years lost. Cato's arms remained crossed, the lines of his face carved by resilience and sorrow. Beside him, Elder Weeksa stood tall, robe swaying in the faint breeze. His eyes, calm and discerning, watched every trembling gesture. The elder's presence was a reminder that this was more than a family reunion. It was a reckoning, a moment where personal pain met the eyes of tradition and justice. Sod sank to her knees before the circle of elders, dust clinging to her hair and dress. "I have returned, not seeking escape, but to face what I have done," she said, voice breaking but steady enough to carry across the square. Her confession echoed through the silent crowd, a ripple of remorse that brushed the hearts of all who listened. "I left a child behind, my own flesh and blood. I know my actions have brought shame and sorrow." The elders whispered among themselves, words carrying the weight of ancient laws. "A mother who abandons must answer for her deeds," one voice murmured, while another countered, "but the heart can repent, and the child must be protected above all." A debate unfolded, measured and deliberate. Justice for the child, mercy for the mother, these were not easy questions. Each argument folded into the next, the crowd silent, waiting, as if the stones beneath them could sense the balance being sought. The elder stones, worn smooth by generations, were touched lightly by Weeksa. Their cold surface symbolized the ancestors' watchful presence, turning subtly, seeking the truth, weighing the hearts before them, balancing accountability and compassion. The air vibrated with unspoken judgment, the ancestors' eyes invisible but ever present, guiding the living toward justice tempered with wisdom. In that sacred moment, Sada's sobs and Nala's cautious steps, Cato's quiet strength, and Weeksa's solemnity merged. The village held its breath, bearing witness to the raw pain, the fragile hope, and the moral reckoning that only an African tale, rooted in tradition and truth, could hold. Cato stood before the elders, the weight of years pressing into his shoulders like the harmattan wind. Memories stirred, nights spent whispering lullabies into a pink blanket, silent tears shed over an empty doorway, and the ache of a promise broken by Sada's absence. His heart clenched with wounds long buried, yet now the past demanded reckoning. He closed his eyes and felt the clash of bitterness and wisdom. The whispers of the villagers and the silent judgment of the ancestors tugged at him. Anger flared for a moment, a spark that could burn all bridges, but he remembered his mother's words, "A man's strength is in his heart, not his fists." Breathing deeply, Cato opened his eyes. "I have suffered, yes," he began, voice steady but firm. "Yet vengeance will not shape the path for Nala. I will not break under anger. Sod may return, but only through truth and duty." The crowd murmured, astonished by his restraint. This was no ordinary forgiveness. It was a test of honor, a measure of character far beyond resentment. The elders nodded among themselves, recognizing the power of a man who chose grace over rage. "A father's heart," Elder Weeksa intoned, "is judged not by fury, but by the wisdom to guide the next generation." The people bowed their heads in quiet respect, understanding the moral weight of Cato's choice. With solemn voices, the elders praised Cato for raising Nala with integrity, for nurturing a child in the absence of a mother, and for shaping her into a reflection of tradition and compassion. One elder stepped forward, placing a hand gently on Nala's head. "May your path be blessed, child of our soil," he said, eyes gleaming with ancestral pride. Sod, kneeling before the circle, felt the enormity of what lay ahead. Her redemption would not be whispered, it would be earned daily, through honesty, care, and unbroken commitment. The elders' eyes watched her, not in anger, but as guardians of justice and mercy. The community, too, promised vigilance, ready to guide, judge, and protect both the child and the moral balance of their village. Nala clutched her father's hand, a bridge between the pain of yesterday and the hope of tomorrow. She embodied the healing that could span broken hearts, a living symbol that wounds could mend when honesty and duty guided the way. Sada's eyes, once clouded with ambition and regret, now held understanding. She whispered to herself, "Freedom without responsibility is an empty calabash, and I must learn to fill it with care, not desire." The elders called the village together, and in unison, the people recited the closing proverb, "A person may outrun the shadows of yesterday, but they cannot escape the sunrise of truth. Dust and light mingled in the dawn as Cato, Sod, and Nala walked together, step by step, toward healing. The road was long, but the first rays of a new day promised that the family, scarred yet steadfast, would move forward into a future shaped by wisdom, love, and the enduring strength of tradition.